This is what we've been covering in previous sessions. We've done quite a few so far, one a month. And in the first sessions, we're talking about systems paradigm. It's a kind of the overarching way of looking at the world when we take a systems approach to design. What does that mean? All this holism. And we did that originally. And then we're now talking about principles, which are kind of the core concepts that are going to guide our design decisions. In future sessions, we're going to look at methods and tools in systems design. But here we are, the key principles for designing complex systems. We talked a bit about this before. We're shifting from designing simpler systems, chairs and even complicated systems like cars, and we're moving into this world of trying to work with complex adaptive systems, highly interconnected, interdependent. They have kind of adaptive capacity. They evolve over time, so on and so forth. Many interconnected parts. Talk about smart cities, organization design, Internet of Things, transport systems, supply chains, information systems, sustainable buildings, so on and so forth. These are examples of complex adaptive systems we're trying to design for. These are some of the characteristics of complex adaptive systems. They're open instead of being closed. They have emergent properties. You put all the parts together and they interact in ways which are surprising and unpredictable. Like in traffic, we have all those cars. Each person is able to make their own choices, but they're all interconnected and interdependent. We get emergent properties like traffic jams and so forth. Adaptation, the parts have a high degree of autonomy and adaptive capacity, and they evolve over time. These are kind of multi-dimensional systems, social aspects, environmental aspects, economic, technical aspects, so on and so forth. They are more like networks than things or objects. So transport city, a system, or the internet is a good example. And they also have this kind of self-organizing aspect to them, where parts have adaptive capacity and they're interacting locally. And out of those local interactions, we can get the emergence of patterns forming through peer interaction only. And so that's kind of what we're trying to design for, those kinds of systems, and work with that complexity, right? And to do that, we need a new kind of design approach, and we call that systems design. And it's going to have to be kind of holistic in its considerations. It's going to have to work with these open systems. It's going to be thinking about integration and networks and decentralization, and how do we design for evolution and for adaptive capacity and all of this, resilience and so forth. So that's what we've been talking about. We've covered a few of those already. The first one was around holism. You can see it here. Had a great discussion. Last time we talked about open systems. And today we're going to look at relational paradigm. I'm sure some of you are aware, systems thinking, it's a relational way of looking at the world. We're thinking more about the relationship between the parts rather than the parts and the properties of the parts themselves. So if we built a car, we might just think about how fast does it go or how fuel efficient it is. That's kind of the properties of the parts. In this here, we're talking about complex systems. We're talking about the relationships between the parts. So we'll be thinking more about a kind of mobility platform or service or something like this. How can we integrate across many different forms of transport to give an integrated service? And that require a more relational way of looking at the world rather than the kind of component-based. So that's what we're talking about today, and kind of different aspects of that we're going to talk about here. And I'm going to share a link now actually with you guys, so you can come and join on the board. If you're not familiar with these sessions, we have an interactive discussion by me posing a few questions and you hopefully posting up responses, and then we have a little discussion around that. So hopefully you got the link there. Hopefully you can join me. Maybe I should set a starting place so you find the right place here. Set a starting view. Yeah. Great. So let me say a few words. We're going to talk about different aspects of a relational way of looking at the world and a relational approach to design. A few kind of key ideas there is around protocols. What are the rules through which things interact and interrelate? Like this card here. interacting with that little device, and certain rules around how they interact and so forth. And we have to design for those. Designing for synergies too. We're looking for how parts interact in a constructive or destructive fashion. So yeah, that's an example of a synergy, right? The bee and the flower there, that's a positive synergy. We can also have negative synergies, right? Going back to the transport example, if you have a big motorway outside your house, it's going to create a lot of noise pollution, and that's a destructive relationship between you and that transport system. A negative synergy, we call it. We're also going to talk about non-linearity. We work with feedback loops and non-linear processes of change. So how we can get cyclical relationships, one thing affects another, and then that feeds back through those relations, and also circular design for circular systems, converting straight lines into loops. So let's start on this first one around protocols. I'll say a few words about that before we get started. So protocol design. Systems are what emerge out of the network of connections between parts. So yeah, as I said, we're less interested in those parts, more interested in the relations and the network patterns that emerge out of the interactions between them. To design systems, we need to design for connections. Connections are governed by the rules of interaction. Two things can only interact successfully if there are some rules to govern the interaction. These rules are called protocols. One way to approach the design of systems is to ask, what are the rules of the connectivity? And how do those rules lead to the outcome seen on the macro level? By defining the protocols, we can define better what interactions happen and what outcomes emerge. In defining the language of communications, we can define how the interaction takes place and what gets said, done, or not done. One good example of the power of protocol design is the World Wide Web. By simply defining the HTTP protocol that enables a set of computers to communicate with each other, we have now the emergence of this incredible system we call the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee did not create all that the web is today. It was created by users. It was created by users. It was a user-generated self-organizing process. He just created the rules and protocols that enable the interaction required for that process to take hold. Okay, so we'll jump in now. Just one last thing. Where am I getting all this information from? It's from this guide here on systems design principles. So you'll find up here a link to that. You'll be able to find it right there. It's a PDF document on our site. You can find all that there. Let's jump right in down here. We're on the first question, talking about protocols. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts around protocols in relation to systems design. Do you think they're important? Why do you think they're important? How can they lead, as I just talked about, to emergence? And do you have any examples? This is one example here, but there are many others. Like I just said, the internet protocol or the web protocol. Please grab a sticky over here, and you just plonk them down here, and then you type in whatever you want to discuss or contribute to discussion here, and we'll take a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'll come back and we'll have discussion. Okay, I'm going to jump in and take a look at some of these, see what you've posted up here. Cultural norms, saying bless you after someone sneezes. Reference, Seinfeld episode. Anybody want to elaborate on this?
Yeah. So there was an episode of Seinfeld where somebody sneezed, and I think somebody didn't say bless you, and it became a big controversy, as like everything in Seinfeld does when some minor thing happens. And so that's a good example, sort of a protocol of, someone sneezes and there's an expectation around like when it's appropriate to say bless you and who can say it, whether it's, your boyfriend can say bless you, and if he doesn't, can someone else say it, or is that rude for like somebody to sort of take his, opportunity to say bless you? Probably most of Seinfeld is based around this sort of idea of there's implicit sort of social rules.
Hmm. So culture is kind of a protocol then, isn't it? It's kind of what you're talking about, I think. Yep. Okay. So social services plus identity validation, health card, social security number, etc. Social services. Anybody want to talk on this?
Sorry, me again. So yeah, just to get access to a lot of social services, you need to show some form of identification that, I am a person who's entitled to get healthcare services or whatever.
Yeah, and someone kind of creates the rules around that too. Yeah, okay, good one. Let's stay going here. So these ones, technology interfaces and easy information access for illiterate people, disabled and international visitors. Yeah, so interfaces are a kind of protocol, a kind of language, aren't they? Through which we're kind of expected to know. We have a lot of we've built up a lot of knowledge, haven't we, about how to, over the past 20 years, how to interact with all these computers and all this signs and symbols, what a thumbs up means and so forth. Anybody want to talk on this? The guest writer? Inclusiveness, always on functions that allow people access protocols in emergency cases, cross-system platforms. Okay, and banking and finance protocols. Yep, for sure. Definition of cases when someone is announced to make decisions. Definition of cases when someone is announced to make decisions, when to call police or ambulance in work environment, what to report to whom. Yeah. And but those are kind of procedures are like protocols too, aren't they? Like if this, then do that. Anybody want to talk on this? Enforced moaning protocols like entrance with a card or closed door from one way or drinking water fountains. Etster, is this yours? Okay. Decision making within organizations, laws governing house sales and the conveyancing process. Kind of the rules of how things work, and it's pretty invisible stuff too, isn't it? Like we think of design as all these physical things. How are we going to design the casing for this or that bus or whatever it is? But these are very kind of, it's the institutional stuff, it's the invisible kind of dark matter. But it kind of shapes everything, really, doesn't it? Like the way it's the rules of how things are going to work around here, that you can't just jump off that bus and that this thing's going to talk to that thing and how everything's kind of interacting. It's kind of key to shaping everything, really, but it's not what we see. It's not so visible. Anybody want to talk on these pink ones down here? Family dynamics dictated by different cultures. Yep. decision making within organizations. Yep. Material designed by Android. Yeah. This is a kind of a design language for the interface material. Okay. Anybody else want to talk on that? Android's material design? File formats, PDFs, docs, etc. Yep. Grammar, syntax. Yeah, it's how, I mean, ultimately it's how everything is gonna interact with everything else, isn't it? Like the grammar and syntax, like the way language, it's a protocol, isn't it? And it's the way that we interact with each other. Without that, like we'd be going absolutely nowhere. It's the way all these parts are going to interoperate in some way. And all the signs and the symbols, like around this bus, telling us that this is a bus station and the bus is going to come at this much time. And it's going to go in this direction. Those are all kind of protocols and rules and communications through which the whole system is going to organize itself. It would be absolutely a disjointed, dysfunctional system without all these rules and protocols. Books, Miro, language for sure. Organic certification. Anybody want to talk on that? Or rules to avoid tragedy of the commons. What's this one? I like how you use the word world, used the world as protocol instead of interactions, because people tend to integrate parts together by discounting the interactions. Asking people to define protocols will focus defining rules, traditions, processes. Yeah, it's thinking about all the dark kind of matter, the stuff we don't really see around us, and how do we design that? There's a company here in London called Dark Matter Labs, and that's their focus. They call institutions dark matter. These rules through which they're actually traditionally an architectural company, but over time they've become more interested in kind of systems change. And they see this kind of dark matter, like it's not so much about the buildings, obviously that shapes our physical environment. What are the rules, as we've been talking about, surrounding all of this? That's really what shaped things at the end of the day around here, I'd say. It's ultimately, it's kind of where we're going with the design, the evolution, moving away from just designing chairs and so forth to design thinking and services, and ultimately, how can we kind of design institutions and all these different protocols in society? All right, Seaspiracy and misleading certification. Yep. Okay, education. Data exchange between the participants. Standardization. Yep. Can informal weak links, link interactions lead to viable protocols within a system? I guess it's interesting to think about how if you change the protocol somewhere, what comes out of that? I think this is an emergent process. When you change the protocols, then you have to kind of run the system in some way to see what's actually going to come out of that. So can informal weak links interactions lead to viable protocols within a system? Can a system sense and use interactions outside from under its main bell curve understanding, or is it usually more of the same? Anybody want to explain this? Talk on this?
Yeah, that was me. I mean, we're talking about designing new systems, but usually there's something existing already, which already has a set of protocols. And oftentimes it just keeps the same going on. And it's from the outside, for long tail distribution, those things that don't happen so often, where new ideas can come, but the system isn't capable of actually absorbing it and changing itself. So a lot of times you need to have some form of disruption before those protocols can be, reevaluated and reset.
Yeah, and you can transform a system just as you say, but you can also kind of introduce a new set of protocols. Like you think about what's happening in transport. We had all these kind of disconnected things, and now we have information technology, and we can start to just connect them all, and you can start to get kind of seamless. You can book one ticket that takes you through all these different modes of mobility, and you can get the emergence of a whole new kind of services and functions within the system by connecting it, creating protocols, and that's all you're doing. So I mean, it's the point we're talking about, this like how immaterial all this is. To change the system, you don't have to change the cars and the bus and so forth. You could just start creating protocols for them to all interconnect, and then new services, new systems can be built on that in the way that the internet has, right? It's the mother of all protocols. It's
Right.
It's incredible what's happened, isn't it, over the past 20 years, and what we can build on top of those protocols now.
You can work within the system without having to use the system.
Yeah, changing language and changing those rules. Okay, classroom rules in education. Yep, affordance. Bruno, talk on that. Affordance.
Hi, Jonathan here. Yeah, I wrote that down. I mean, affordances is a notion in design generally, which is basically a feature of any object that affords action from a user, so that enables some kind of user and indicates some kind of user action or capability. And so we interpret the world through what we can do with it. So we can look at a knife and we analyze its properties, and the knife has an affordance such as a handle that you can hold and you can cut some meat or something. And I think this is a kind of hidden layer of protocols of us and how we interact with the physical world.
Yeah, and the possibilities of the interaction with the system and the way you can kind of use it, and yeah, I think I get what you mean. And how the interface kind of can really, you could have the same system behind it, but just revamp the interface, and you change the whole experience for the user.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the shape itself, how you design the shape of a button, for example, you know, a button, you could be something that you have to press, or something maybe you have to pull, or that you turn. And so the design of the button will also have an so there will be an affordance linked to it. For instance, if you're talking about a kind of on-off button, it's probably going to be something that you can push. If it's a gradient that you want to set, then it's something maybe you can turn, and the physical shape will send a message to users as to how it should be used and what capabilities it has.
Yeah, it's the input really sets the rules, doesn't it? And we see that everywhere now, because more and more we're interacting with systems, with institutions, with organizations through forms. I just went for my vaccine thing the other day, and it's an online process with the NHS, which is, you know, a form. There's about 10 forms I had to go through, but each one is a set of rules, isn't it? It's saying you can do this or you can do that, and that's all you can do. And you could, it sets the rules through defining the interface. And I think, I was just thinking about service design too. That's kind of a lot what a service designer does. They come into an organization, and maybe the whole system of the organization stays the same, but they put a new interface on it, don't they? From the perspective of the end user, to help them navigate through that, what may remain a complicated siloed system in the back end. They come in from the end user's perspective and say, how can we actually guide them through that? So again, it's kind of, they're putting an interface onto a system which probably, if it's a large organization, it's probably just going to stay the same in the back end. Anyway, that's the power of protocols and interfaces. So it's very kind of powerful. You can really shape what's going on. But let's talk here now. We're still talking about relations within the design of complex systems. And here we want to look at this idea of synergies. I think it's a really important one. How the parts interrelate. I mean, it's pretty fundamental in design, right? We're thinking about how to arrange elements within a system to get some desired functional outcome. And obviously, we've got to put those parts together in constructive ways. And that's kind of the idea of a synergy, that we get things working together in constructive ways. They can also work in destructive ways. So I'd love for you to have a think about that. Maybe examples you could come up with. Another one I can think about is rainwater in cities. In some cities, say in Southeast Asia, where they have monsoons, and that just lands on a whole pile of tarmac, and it's actually no use to the city, and it floods the city and creates a lot of problems because they haven't got a synergy between the materials there in the city and the water that's coming in. There's a kind of a negative synergy that creates an overflow. Maybe you have some other examples of synergies, positive or negative. I would love to hear them, or anything else you'd like to share about designing for synergies within complex systems. I'll share the link again. We'll take a few minutes to have a think about that and post up any thoughts that you have. If you need any help, just give me a shout. Okay, I'm going to take a look at some of these. If you still have ideas, stay posting them up, and we'll try and get to those. Okay, so teamwork between individual members. Do you think that's something we can design? Anybody? Can we design teamwork? I think this is an interesting question. Trust. Can we design trust? Trust is the first step to human connection and synergy. Anybody want to talk on that?
Yeah, just small thought about that. I think when we talk about complex systems and the intent to be inclusive, it's quite hard to consider different cultural backgrounds or even economical backgrounds. So how to put them and create trustfulness in systems when we talk about interface, like a bank, and you have to talk to different economical classes, how to create trust in that interface and communicate that you can trust in that system. I think that's...
Yeah, it's a really, really good one. It's a really important discussion because it's, as you talk about, but it's also a lot about information technology these days and how we're going to deal with artificial intelligence and all of this. How are we going to trust that these machines are coming up with things that are good for us instead of whatever else? And that's going to hinge a lot around, as you say, inclusivity. How do you include people in the system? And transparency is going to be another big part of it, isn't it? Like, how were these decisions made? What's really going on behind the scenes? And that's a huge challenge because if you talk about banks, as you say, there's a whole pile of opacity there, some engineered specifically, some because of the systems that get so complicated, and the same with information technology. The systems get so complicated, we don't know what algorithms determining what we get when we put a search into Google or something. So really, really interesting one. And trust, we know that's going to become such a premium, such an important thing. And how do we design systems for that is a key question. I'd like to have a whole panel discussion about that or something, but let's stay moving on for now. When we refer to complex systems as corporate culture and in merging process, the first step to combine skills from different silos, building trust and empathy would create synergies. Yep. Okay. In digital systems, trust can be assured by a nice design and friendly interface. How to create a global system to attend as so diverse multiculturals. How to create layers of symbolic and visual discourse in order to build trust and fidelity. Yeah, it's a, as you say, cultural choice. Like if people don't see themselves reflected in the system, their culture, their language, they feel excluded, don't they? And they don't really trust it. Great. So
as you mentioned, transport systems in London is quite easy to understand all the complex use of, TfL can design the system, and even if you're Japanese or Brazilian, or you can understand the system, if you go to a different country, to a more specific language or cultural complexity, that would be quite difficult to take a bus or something, I think.
Yep, very true. Interesting perspectives that synergies can be destructive. Have never thought about it in the negative context. Yeah, you see, that's one problem here. We always think this self-organizing complexity stuff is good. Sometimes it can be bad. So there's the idea of a synergy, but then they can be positive or they can be negative. Negative is called interference. When two things interfere with each other, that could be two people at work. That could be noise, pollution. I just gave you as a good example, right? Cars going by my house, they're interfering with my sound atmosphere, right? And that's a negative synergy. But it could be positive. You know, music is an example, or good music, should we say, is an example of positive synergy when we get those notes right and so forth. But they're everywhere, both positive and negative. So what else we got here? Depending on how you build your metrics, the focus may be on answering the number alone without caring about relationships. Anybody? Okay, I stay going here. Example, bee pasture within the city, good for bees and environment, but not that good for people with allergy. So this is, yeah, a negative synergy, bee stinging you, I guess is an example of that. So example, let people walk their path in new districts. Let people walk their path in new districts and build the pavement after. Eliminate waste with no building, non-used pavement and good for citizens. Eliminate waste with not building, non-used pavement, okay, and good for citizens, yeah. You think about cars too in our environment, they have a huge negative synergy with human beings. I mean, noise, space they take up, air pollution, and also the fact that they're dangerous. So it's interesting, like if you think about it, we don't really look at the design of many systems in this way. Like imagine taking a system and first asking this question, what are the positive and negative synergies in that system? I don't think most people are actually designing transport systems like that. I think they design them in different ways. They aren't thinking like that, or other areas. So info share about what is happening. Whatever is happening helps people to resonate with their own ideas, activities. Yep. Okay, so if 1 + 1 = 3, yeah, that's the idea. What we do now is a very good example of synergies, collaborative learning. Yep, can be. So in a democracy, opposition creates a scrutiny over the use of power that is given to the governing body. Countries working together to help the development and distribution of vaccines. Yep, could be an example. Time can be an underlying factor of changing the nature of synergies. Time can be an underlying factor of changing nature of synergies. For example, the synergy between frontline healthcare workers, especially in the slums and rural areas, and communities becomes slightly destructive because of the COVID pandemic, even though it might have been a constructive synergy before the pandemic. Anybody want to talk on that?
Hi, I can maybe speak to this. So I was kind of just thinking about how synergy in itself is not a stock concept, and it kind of changes over time. And one destructive synergy can become more positive or vice versa. And this is the example that I've used here is kind of the synergy between two different parts of a system, which is the public health. So one is the health provider side, which is the frontline workers, and one is the customer side, which is just like the communities. And I've taken the case specifically for the low middle income populations, and how these synergies might have changed because of the pandemic, and the nature might have changed because that kind of time horizon. So
yeah, it's a good example, and it illustrates that the context matters. As you're saying here, you put two things together in one context where there isn't much stress, it could be a positive synergy. You put them together in another context where there's a lot of stress, like a COVID pandemic, and they can create a negative synergy. And goes back to the idea of trust. Trust can be the kind of infrastructure that the context. There's a lot of trust, then I think you're a lot between, for example, you talk here, frontline workers and the communities they're working in, they're going to have to cooperate a lot to actually get the best results for everyone. But if there's no trust in that context, going to have problems. If there is trust, there's a lot greater potential for synergies. So it's about the kind of context that people are in, not just the specific kind of parts and how they're interacting. Countries working together to help, acceptance of a system for combining or modifying, construct and deconstruct according to needs and purpose. Anybody want to talk on that? Platform ecosystems would arguably allow for new synergies, but need to granularize components for combination ideas inspired by Boundaryless and Simon Cicero. Okay, platform ecosystems would arguably allow for new synergies, but need to granularize components for recombination. Yeah, I mean, that's what a platform should be doing, really, isn't it? Thinking about how the parts could interrelate in synergy. The platform is kind of the context, really, or the environments that's hosting different producers and consumers and different modules and components, and they should be trying to figure out what are those synergies. Like a transport platform, be figuring out how we're going to put together the different modes of transport in the right way to deliver the transport service that's needed. Okay, so it does become very relevant in the context of platforms because they're obviously about connecting things. Eliminating the need of redundant steps in a system would promote better synergies among the essential remainders. Driving people to focus on a skill or a discipline instead of a purpose can stifle the synergy between people and knowledge. A purpose can use a set of discipline. A purpose can use a set of discipline and skills. Being a generalist isn't a bad thing. Give way for ambulance when in traffic. Traffic protocol. Okay, so we're straying back over there. Let's actually move on and try and at least complete one more board before we wrap up. So I think that both of those were really interesting topics, actually. I think that is so crucial when you're thinking about the design of a complex system to start with this perspective. Again, not thinking about the parts, but thinking about how they're interrelated. Where are those positive and negative synergies in the system? I think really, as I say, if we design cities thinking like that, we'd design them very differently. Anyway, let's stay going. Down here, we want to talk a bit about non-linearity and feedback loops. Working with, I guess this is getting more into circular design, working with feedback loops and non-linear processes of change, how things are interdependent. One thing affects another, and then that feeds back. How can we integrate and work with that in the design of complex systems? Do you have any ideas? It could be part of organization design, where we're thinking about when we do something, we give feedback, or we get feedback, and we create a kind of circularity, or it could be in materials economy, so on and so forth. Let's take a little bit of time to think about that. Post up our stickies. Okay, we've just got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to jump in and take a look at some of these. Using a top-down and bottom-up approach. Anyone? We talked about this before in other sessions. Anybody want to talk on this? It's really important, yeah, in organization design, right? So that people get feedback. And, you know, we were talking about in our organization group, actually, the problem with hierarchies is that you have these kind of linear flows of information, and you don't get kind of adequate feedback from the decisions that people are making, right? They make decisions and they get implemented by others, and then it's other people who are affected by them, and you don't get the kind of top down, bottom up, or proper feedback loops between people, and that creates problems. So repeat cooperation, tit for tat. Yep. Addiction, self-confidence. Yeah, organizational design. It's not only the non-linearity, but the number of degrees or incremental steps between phases and connection to other systems. Example, water systems, atmospheric rivers, and climate change beyond on the ground concerns of drought within a region requires a system-wide perspective, coarse-grained information to start, but making it relevant to others is challenging. Anybody want to talk on this?
That was me. I mean, it's hard enough dealing with nonlinearity, you know, you need calculus and all that kind of good stuff. But when what you're dealing with is, like, for example, we've got a drought going on in California right now, okay? But the Stockholm Resilience Center is saying that not only do you have to worry about the regional droughts, but you also worry about the fact that climate change is changing the atmospheric rivers that are defining where the rain falls, and those rainfalls are defining what happens with climate change. So it's a positive, vicious feedback. But trying to get people to think about it is hard when they're just thinking about the fact that they can't flush the toilets.
Yeah, yeah. So this is kind of the systems mapping stuff, isn't it? Starting off with that broader view of the interrelationships and feedback loops and so forth, to get people to step back and start to look at the system on that level. And what you say gets to kind of unpredictability of the whole thing. As you say, things are changing, and then those changes are affecting more changes. And yeah, okay. So divergent and convergent thinking. How do we think that relates here? Analyze metrics mathematically to find coherence and significance. Exclude human sense. Let children to use the given system. Learn through what they recognize. So ensuring design programs and interventions incorporate the voice of the community they serve to benefit, using an iterative process to inform, feedback, evaluate, and improve. Anybody? It goes back to the idea of trust again, too, and kind of transparent systems, ensuring that people get an input into what's being built. And I think the way you could get the most kind of buy-in and so forth is just showing them their input, but just designing a system that allows them to have input, but see the effects of their input, I guess, also. And the feedback that is caused by their interventions. So ensuring design programs and interventions incorporate the voice of the community they serve to benefit, using the iterative process to inform. Yeah, okay, and that kind of applies to everything we design, like letting people see the impact they're having, the input the effects of it. Okay, transparency and open information. Yep, top-down decisions, broadcasting media, one-way instructions. Those are simple samples of a non-circular system. So when we talk about regenerative self-organizing systems, a multi-channel communication might be a way of keeping the system alive and improving. Anybody?
Yeah, it's just a thought about how the one-way systems doesn't work anymore. So how we can create multi-point communication or multi-point feeding spaces. We can help the system to improve at the same time, instead just having some areas improving or exchanging information. So it's a way to keep the system healthy, open these spaces to multi-way of feeding or communication. So dashboards, real-time indicatives, and transparency and open information across, when you talk about a corporation, of course, but also digital systems.
Yeah, for sure. Getting everyone's input, keep it alive, as you say, and have multiple inputs and see the effects of those inputs as a way to make it regenerative, a self-improving system, and moving away from top-down decisions. But the problem is complexity, isn't it? Right? We have those single channels, those top-down, because it's a simple way of doing it. And then you're getting into quite complex systems when you really want these multi-channels, everyone to have their input, aggregating that input, and really affecting the system. I guess we have a push model for a good reason, don't we? Like, it's so much simpler just to push a service out, solution out. But when you have that feedback loop and you got those many users feeding back into the system and shaping it, and it has to adapt and evolve in response to their input, it's a different paradigm, isn't it? It's all this complexity stuff. So very, very challenging indeed, but that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to harness complexity, work with it rather than exclude it. So what we're doing here is hopefully going to help us, right? Understanding these principles will help us actually design those systems. And, you know, when you understand all this system stuff, it's supposed to help us kind of see the simplicity, see the clarity and complexity. So it becomes simpler in some sense. Never going to be easy, but becomes simpler for us to actually start to design those kind of systems when we start to understand these principles and work with them, rather than kind of looking at it in the old paradigm, which just makes it look incredibly complicated and overloading. So that's that, guys. Thank you very much. Our time is up. It was great to have this discussion. And we'll come back again next time, and we'll do it again in the month, and we'll follow on from here. And we're also talking about networks and decentralized systems, modularity, user, these topics here around service systems, around user-generated systems, decentralization, modularity. These are all kind of core ideas in design of all complex systems. So we'll come back and talk about that next time. I'll post it on the website and keep you guys notified about that. So yeah, I'll let you all get on with your lives. Thank you very much for joining, and take care. Bye now.